now. Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, it's all recorded
Okay.
now, even when I'm so, you know, the argument from what they do. There was a time when that wrote this song, and there are 10 different authors, right? And so I, as a person who is chief of staff, try serving the chief justice doesn't have time. And how he did this, it wasn't created until the early 70s. Position.
The chief of staff. Oh,
yeah, and it how Earl Warren handled all
yeah.
that. I don't know.
I wonder if he pushed it off on some of his clerks.
Well, you hear, well, that might be.
Yeah.
That might be. And things are much smaller.
Right.
Everything was a lot simpler. Complicated. So whether they had, you know, they always have 4 statutory officers, and the other 6 non-statutory were created by Warren Burger. Apparently somebody did that. You need a press officer, you need a budget officer.
Well, I feel like
personnel officer. Well, the other thing, when I found out that was fairly new, was IT.
Oh yeah, I mean
You know,
that totally comes with the
So
times.
that was
But I feel like also the other ones coming about later on makes sense when you think about, you know, how much more importance the court started to gain in the public eye, you know, and all that. I'm really excited to be hearing it.
That's part of my speech.
Yeah, right.
I'm just going to introduce you in a second.
Should I sit back there?
Sure. And is there anything else that you're doing or you want to spread?
I don't think so.
Okay. Great. I think we'll just wait just one more minute more.
Okay.
Sure, a little over, but I'll just sure. Some people finally.
And I'd love some time. This shouldn't take, well, it may take 40 minutes. Okay, thank you.
I'm already doing those runs out, you know, just carry on top of that. But I'm not on at all.
Welcome everyone to our FedSoc event. We are so excited to have you. I don't know most of your faces, so welcome. We're excited to have you. I don't know if you're 1Ls or 2Ls. Who are 1Ls? Awesome, welcome. 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls. Okay, great. Well, we are so happy to have you to our event. We have a wonderful guest speaker today, Noel Augustin. And I'm just going to read a little bit about him before he begins his presentation. We also have Dale Durer. He's an adjunct faculty member and also a judge in Virginia that's going to be joining us via Zoom. And he should be on in just a little bit. So yes, Noel Augustin served as Chief of Staff to Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist at the Supreme Court of the United States, was Assistant Director of the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, Deputy Director of the Association of American Law Schools, the Assistant Dean at Boston College Law School, and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University Law Center. He practiced with firms in Massachusetts, Riyadh, Rome, and Washington, D.C., most recently as of counsel with Seafarth Shaw. Prior to his work in the law, he taught English and was an assistant dean at, is it Ripon College? Ripon College in Wisconsin and Linfield College in Oregon. He's a graduate of Dartmouth College, Stanford University, and Notre Dame Law School. and did graduate work at Columbia University Parker School of Law, Foreign and Comparative Law. He has contributed to numerous publications ranging from the Journal of Supreme Court History and the American Journal of International Law to the New Oxford Review and Homiletic and Pastoral Review. He is married and the father of 3 children and 4 grandchildren and lives here in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Please welcome Noel Augustin.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, geez, all of a sudden I got a frog. Just as my moment of glory comes. And thanks to the Federalist Society, and thanks to the Washington College of Law, and thanks to American University. It's good to be back, although I haven't been here since sometime in the 1980s, so I don't want to overdo it. You know, this is, of course, this building wasn't here at this building. But I lived, when I first moved to Washington, I lived in your neighborhood in the corner of Connecticut and Albemarle, and I still live only 15 minutes away. And I was telling Matt it's a lot easier to get here today than 1 year ago when I was in North Dakota. Anyone here from North Dakota? Well, that leads to the next question. How many of you are from outside the DC area? Okay, where? You can just shout it out.
Chicago.
All right. Sorry?
Florida.
Florida. Oh, good.
Tennessee.
All right.
Alabama.
Texas. Whoa.
Alabama.
Wonderful. This is terrific. I mean, it's good to know that there are people from America here at American University. As you well know, for a lot of people, Washington, D.C. area is not America. And for those of you outside, you probably have experienced that firsthand, maybe. Well, at the outset, I am an old professor in more ways than one, so I like to ask questions. And please feel free to ask questions yourselves. We'll save time at the end, as is customary. But, you know, if there's something I say in the course of things that you got a question about, put up your hand. We'll conduct it sort of like a class. Now, first of all, Matt warned me there will be a professor here and a judge, so you gotta know, who the troublemakers are right up front, but they're not here. But my first substantive question, as lawyers like to say, does anyone here know what the Judicial Conference of the United States is? Now, don't feel bad if you don't. And I certainly didn't know what it was when I was in your position, and I would not be surprised if most lawyers don't know what it is, including those who practice in federal courts. The Judicial Conference of the United States is sort of the policy-making body for the federal judiciary. And it is comprised of the chief judge of every circuit, as well as a district court judge who is elected for a 2-year term. Plus, there are representatives from bankruptcy judges, magistrate judges, Court of International Trade, Claims Court, that type of thing. They meet twice a year, in the fall and in the spring, and as we speak, they are meeting. And this year is their 100th anniversary. It is chaired by the Chief Justice of the United States. And if you're wondering what his title is, of the United States or of the Supreme Court of the United States, it's both. It depends on what capacity he's operating. They, as I say, deal with policy matters. Those types of things can range to the usual cameras in the courtroom and funding for the Federal Defender Program, which is very, most people don't know the Federal Defender Program is under the judiciary. I think about there, they have 22 committees. The 4 I staff were defenders and probation officers, court security, which again, you're too young to remember this, but after the Timothy McVeigh bombing, it's a very, very big deal. And after 9/11, a big deal. But their policy decisions, and this is important. They need not be followed by the judges. Now, most judges do follow them, but they don't have to. The Judicial Conference does not have rulemaking authority. And the point here is sort of important in the sense that the federal courts, federal judiciary, federal judges may be the last vestige of feudalism in the civilized world, in the sense that every Article III judge is his own, and I lose track of this. They are all dukes and duchesses, counts and countesses, barons and baronesses, earls and what's the form of earl, the feminine form of earl. Today it's probably like them, but they, them. Oh, I don't know what it is, but you get the picture. They are almost untouchable. But there are limits, and those limits are the heart of part one of this presentation, which is bad behavior. Now, does anyone know what the Association of American Law Schools is? This has a little more relevance to your status right now, and that part of your tuition goes to pay the law school's dues to the AALS, known as ALS to its detractors. The purpose of ALS, one purpose of it, is to provide sort of a second tier of accreditation. Let's say Podunk U wants to start a law school, or your local YMCA. And don't laugh. There are a number of schools out there today that are quite respectable that started out as YMCA law schools. Times have changed. Anyhow, the important thing is that the law school needs to get accreditation, if it's only provisional accreditation. And the reason for that is if you do not have ABA accreditation, your graduates will not be able to sit for the bar in every state in the union, basically. Now, there are local accreditation and state accrediting agencies. And one I'm most familiar with is California. You can go, there are a number of California law schools that are not approved by the ABA, but that are approved by the state of California. And that means they can sit for the bar in California, but nowhere else, unless they have some agreement with Arizona or some other state. So that is the first level of accreditation. The next level of accreditation is membership in the AALS, which is sort of a status symbol. And it says Podunk U Law School has arrived. The Washington College of Law, by the way, arrived in 1947. That's when you became members of the AALS. Now, once a school is in doesn't mean that it's, hands off. You can coast. You have to make sure that they're keeping up with standards and so forth, and therefore there are inspections every 7 or 10 years. And the inspection teams are joint with the ABA and the AALS, and part of my job at the AALS was putting those teams together and going on inspections myself. Now, it does other things. The AALS does other things as well. It publishes a directory of law teachers, holds a national annual meeting, holds a faculty recruitment conference, staffs its various committees. A minor part of my job there was to show the legal education flag to the various associations that exist here in DC. What I learned when I took the job was that there is nearly every form of human endeavor has an association, and most of them seem to be here in DC. For example, in the area of education, there are associations for medical education, business education, higher education, school boards, and on and on and on. There's even an association of association directors. Well, I was showing the legal education flag at a higher education presentation by a man who was then president of a small women's college in Maryland, but who had previously been a big muckety-muck in Lyndon Johnson's HEW. Does anyone here know what HEW stood for? Oh, yes, sir.
Health Education and Welfare Department.
Whoa, I'm very impressed. That's knowledge that's half century old. That's terrific. And what happened when Jimmy Carter became president, he broke out the Department of Education. So HEW is now HHS. Good, very good. Well, he spent most of his time, because he was a big government money. I'm not talking about education, I'm talking about government. And he had 3 rules of success for working in the federal government, and here they are. Number 1, show up. Number 2, keep your hand out of the till. Number 3, don't mess around with the help. Now, when I heard this, I was appalled. I said, that's it? Notice he didn't say anything about doing any work. Well, anyhow, as time went on and I had a work with the federal government, I came to realize that this man was a genius. He had summarized it all. Now, how do these rules apply to federal judges, who are, of course, federal employees? Show up. First of all, if any of you find yourselves in a supervisory position in a federal government, maybe private sector too, you'll be astounded about how much of your time can be consumed by just a very few employees who arrive late, leave early, don't show up at all, or all of the above. Now, it's possible to fire federal government employees, despite legend to the contrary. And I've done it. But it takes a lot of time and effort and record building. Now, that said, the overwhelming number of federal employees that I've known are hardworking, conscientious, and bright, and this is not let's bash federal government employees type of presentation. And that is also the case, of course, with federal judges. The few who suffer from the sin of sloth can be kept in line by their chief judges in various informal ways. And one formal way of doing so is so-called motion lists. And what they do, it shows that and they have to be published, and it's required, which judges have motions outstanding for more than 6 months. But even that's controversial, because there are some motions are summary judgments, some can be very, very complicated. The very serious problems, though, come with rule number 2. Keep your hand out of the till. After only a couple months on the job at the Supreme Court, I received this packet, all these stamps on it, confidential, eyes only, and what's this? So I opened it up, and what it was a transcript, an FBI transcript of a wiretap. And in those days, wiretap meant something. There weren't any cell phones. They didn't have to tap the wires of that purported to show that Judge Elsie Hastings, a federal judge from the Southern District of Florida, was offered a bribe and accepted it. Now, the dialogue was somewhat oblique, a lot more than the Nixon-Watergate tapes, which is you would necessarily be familiar with those. But it was not, Judge Hastings, if you go lenient on my client's sentencing and return some of his seized assets, we'll give you $150,000. Yes. No, it was not that. It was not that clear. Nonetheless, the judges on the judicial conference found it sufficiently clear that they recommended that Congress proceed with impeachment. Judge Hastings was, in fact, impeached by the House of Representatives and convicted by the Senate. But there were some curlicues here. The Senate conviction came from a Senate committee and not the full body. He appealed and won on this point at the Court of Appeals level, and his case went all the way to the Supremes. They ruled that the courts had no jurisdiction over how the Senate conducts its business, so his impeachment was upheld. The most interesting parts of this case, though, are the prequel, so to speak, and the sequel. The prequel is that prior to his impeachment, Judge Hastings was tried in the federal court on a bribery charge and was acquitted. The sequel is even more interesting. The irrepressible Judge Hastings later ran for Congress, and he won. And he was appointed to the Judiciary Committee. So he was sitting next to the very people who impeached him.
God bless America. People love to remember Yogi Berra, what Yogi, what it stood for, the Yogiisms and so on. Guys, you've missed a lot if you don't. There's so much advantage to being young, but you miss a lot. But anyhow, one Yogiism is that somebody said to Yogi Berra, who was, by the way, he was a baseball player. He was a very famous catcher for the Hall of Fame catcher for the Yankees. And Yogi, the people of Dublin just voted for a Jewish mayor. And Yogi's response was, only in America. Dublin's an Ireland, guys, anyhow. All right, before getting to Rule 3, I should state the obvious. That is what should be obvious, that the overwhelming number of federal judges are scrupulously honest, good, and decent people. And the 223-year history of the federal judiciary and the thousands of federal judges who have served during that time, only about 15 have had impeachment proceedings against them, and far fewer have been convicted. But let's get into Rule 3, a cause of woe for many people. And Rule 3 is what? Nobody paying attention? Come on.
Don't mess with the health.
Don't mess around with the health. Exactly. Well, how many of you, if any, remember Judge Alex Kaczynski? That's a famous fleeting. It really is, because he's, unlike Elsie Hastings, this is only about 5 years old or so where he got in trouble, and he had a lot of national notoriety. Anyhow, he was the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and was accused of sexual misconduct by 6 women who used to clerk for him or work in his chambers. Specifically, get this, he would show them pornography on his computer and ask if they were aroused by it. He once suggested to a law clerk that she exercise naked in the court's gym, and he very ostentatiously ogled their legs. There was nothing subtle about this man. Then it got worse. It was not just images and words, but also physical, tactile. 9 other women accused him over a period of several years of groping and kissing them. Now, I did not know Judge Kaczynski, but I did meet him once. I can tell you, he was no George Clooney. Quite apart from the moral issues involved here, the aesthetic issues were shortly thereafter, Judge Kaczynski retired after the disciplinary proceedings began against him. There was a lot of national publicity about this, primarily because of the timing, and it coincided with the Me Too movement. But while Judge Kaczynski's case received national notoriety, he was not the first federal judge who was involved in one of the 7 deadly sins of lust. Now, I won't ask if anybody here knows what the other 6 are. Well, maybe I will. Anybody else know the other 6? Who doesn't? Right. I won't ask you to recite it.
No, I don't think I know all 6, but would Justice
7.
Thomas count? Just not saying like that it's legitimate, but because during his confirmation hearings there were.
Oh yeah. They weren't. You can't expect the senators to be religiously literate or even morally literate. So they probably wouldn't know what 7 deadly sins are. But lust, that was certainly it. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Accused of the same type of thing. Well, it is one of the 7 deadly sins, and there's good reason for it. Hugh Hefner and Helen Gurley Brown and their disciples have done an amazing job over the past 60 years or so of convincing American society that lust is actually a virtue. But truth and reality have a way of interfering with that fantasy. And a case in point here is another case in point is Judge Edward Nottingham. Judge Nottingham from the District of Colorado is someone I knew personally. He was chairman of the Judicial Conference Committee on Information Technology, and with which a lot of other committees worked, including the 4 that I staffed. From all appearances, he was a very nice man and seemed to be pretty normal. Now, that may be because he didn't wear his judge's robe to the meetings. If he did, we might suspect that something wasn't quite right. As you know, judges' robes in this country are black. Judge Nottingham wore a bright blue robe in his courtroom. Not navy blue, not midnight blue, bright, like sky blue. A name like Nottingham, you know, if you'd think that if he was going to have a different color robe, it would be Lincoln green, you know, like Sherwood Forest, Robin Hood, that type of thing. But no. Well, it wasn't the robe that got him in trouble. He came to the attention of the world outside Colorado, and indeed the world inside Colorado, by one night spending $3,000 in a strip joint. Yeah, $3,000. Not 300, 3,000. This news led to some investigations that revealed that he spent far less on procuring prostitutes, a mere $250 an hour for that form of entertainment. He was found to be on lists of various escort services, tried to get the prostitutes to lie to authorities when they were being questioned, and it was discovered that he was watching porn on his government computer. Interestingly enough, his final act of fatal publicity had nothing to do with sex, and that he illegally parked in a handicapped parking space and then got into a fight with a woman who actually was handicapped and wanted the space. It was the complete catastrophe. Not surprisingly, Judge Nottingham was also forced to resign, ruining his theretofore distinguished reputation and career, and it was. And he then, he had, and also his marriage, and he had 3 kids. Hugh Hefner and Helen Gurley Brown notwithstanding, there's a good reason why lust is a deadly sin, and acting on it is surely not good behavior. By the way, the standards for federal judges is good behavior, spelled with a U in a British fashion. And because, you see and hear so often it's a lifetime appointment. Well, not so. For some, it's not a lifetime appointment. Well, now we move from judges' bad behavior, which can ruin their own lives and the lives of those in their immediate vicinity, so to speak, to bad decisions, which can ruin the lives of thousands of people throughout the country. Before we get started, though, another question. Ken Jennings is not in the audience, right? Here's a Jeopardy question. Article 3 provides, quote, "The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior." So, why do we call the judges on the Supreme Court of the United States justices? Ooh, somebody brought a copy of the Constitution. Well, anybody? No, nobody. All right. The answer is found in Article 1, Section 3, which appropriately for this presentation concerns impeachment. And it provides, quote, "When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside." And as best we can tell, right from the start, associate justices have been calling themselves justices right from the very beginning. Well, bad decisions. In the course of my lifetime, and indeed in the course of your lifetime, we hear a lot about how the Supreme Court has ruined the country. I actually saw a billboard in Oklahoma back in 1969 that had then a legendary motto, "Impeach Earl Warren." But the bad decisions, the ones that split the country, that destroyed domestic tranquility rather than ensuring it, as the preamble to the Constitution has it, came both before Earl Warren and his court as well as after. The first of these, of course, is Dred Scott v. Sanford. Sandford. Actually, his real name was Sanford without the D. The Supreme Court clerk, they didn't have typewriters there, so it wasn't a typo. But he put it in, changed history. This is now Sanford. Anyhow, as you probably know, I'm sure you do, Dred Scott was a major contributing factor to the mentality that led to the outbreak of the Civil War. It's the worst cataclysm in the country's history. Estimates of 600,000 dead are now being revised upwards, some to 700,000, others 750,000. Imagine that. And contrast that with 4,000 in Iraq or 2,800 in Afghanistan, or even 58,000 in Vietnam. It's unbelievable. It was a bad decision and contributed to the ruining, indeed ending, thousands upon thousands of lives. Now, the facts in the case are convoluted, but the essence is that Dred Scott's owner took him from a slave state, Missouri, into a free state, Illinois, and then into free territory, Wisconsin, which at that time included what's part of Minnesota today. And he was there for an extended period of time, for some 2 years. The owner eventually returned Scott to Missouri, where he, Scott, sued for his freedom. Now, it should have been a slam dunk in his favor, since Missouri law for decades held that under these kinds of facts, slaves in effect were freed, and the trial court agreed. On appeal, though, the Missouri Supreme Court proceeded to overturn 28 years of Missouri state court precedent and denied Scott his freedom. It did so for basically political reasons, in effect saying times had changed and that the people of Missouri now favored a stronger pro-slavery position. If they had opinion polls in those days, the court may have used that as a basis for its decision. Now, does that sound familiar? Does it remind you of any court decisions of the 20th century? Scott then sued in federal court and lost because they used the now changed Missouri law. He appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States, where one of the lawyers, by the way, was the brother, one of his lawyers was the brother of one of the justices. Conflict of interest in one of those people. And it turns out that this particular justice voted in Scott's favor. The Supreme Court ruled that Scott had no standing to sue under the diversity clause of Article 3, which specified that federal jurisdiction extended to citizens of different states, end quote. And the court stated that Scott was not a citizen and that no person of African descent, whether or not emancipated, could be a citizen. Why not? Get this. Because blacks were, quote, beings of an inferior order, end quote. Indeed, quote, so far inferior that if they had no rights which the white man is bound to respect, end quote. Does that sound familiar too? If not in words, then at least in practice. Does it remind you of a 20th century decision that likewise has split the country? If Adolf Hitler were on the court, he'd probably say these people were not just beings of an inferior order, that they were, quote, unworthy of life, end quote. The court then went on to declare the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. Many believed it arguably voided the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which provided that states could decide for themselves whether they would be slave or free. Dred Scott was interpreted in the South so that some looked forward to having slave markets on Boston Common. In other words, slavery after Dred Scott would arguably be legal in every state, regardless of what that state wanted. Now, we go from 1857 to 1973. The Dred Scott case of our time, of course, is Roe v. Wade. Has anyone here read Roe? How about Dobbs? Have any of you read Dobbs? Yeah, I mean, read Dobbs, and it'll save you a lot of time with Roe, and it refutes it the best way I know how. Well, here in Roe v. Wade, we're not talking about thousands of dead human beings, but millions. And the beings of an inferior order are not just those of African descent, but human descent in general, innocent, defenseless, preborn children. And quite apart from the barbaric falsehood of making abortion the moral equivalent of a facelift, the issues of federalism in Roe are just awful in themselves. Family law matters, marriage, annulment, divorce, adoption, abortion have traditionally been left to the states. And if the Warren Burger Court, not the Earl Warren Court, Burger's name, by the way, was Warren Earl Burger. So you had Earl Warren succeeded by Warren Earl Burger. If the Burger Court had gone that route, the abortion debate, not unlike the one about slavery, would be far less divisive for the nation as a whole. It's far less likely there would be hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in Washington year after year in the March for Life. They're going to have the March for Life this year, after dogs. What? I know they're having it in different states, but they're going to have a national one. It's far less likely that 48 years after the decision, the national debate would continue, and with great bitterness. Someone who agreed with that assessment, by the way, at the time and since, was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, not exactly a conservative jurist, as have plenty of academics, including Lawrence Tribe, Alan Dershowitz, Archibald Cox. None of those have ever been known as right-wingers. Edward Lazarus, one of Justice Blackmun's former clerks, Blackmun was the one who wrote the decision, wrote that, quote, as a matter of constitutional interpretation and judicial method, Roe borders on the indefensible. Roe was, in the first instance, based upon a lie, in that Norma McCorvey, the plaintiff, claimed she was raped. She later admitted this was a lie. She eventually became a pro-life activist and actually tried to reopen the case in the Federal District Court in Texas, hoping to overturn it. The legal decision was based on the alleged privacy protections supposedly found in the 14th Amendment. So we find ourselves killing tens of millions of human beings, annually some 930,000 beings of, quote, an inferior order, to be sure, over a period of more than 4 decades because of a, quote, penumbra of a shadow, unquote. Or is it the shadow of a penumbra? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's not bright. That's from Griswold v. Connecticut. And by the way, speaking of Justice Thomas, if you read his concurrence in Dobbs, he really questions this whole bit. So he talks about procedural due process. When I was in your shoes, I could never understand it. How many of you have taken Conval or are taking it now or will take it? I assume you will take it before it's all over. And you'll hear this thing, and I said, well, geez, I just don't understand it. But hey, I was a B student. I was an A student. I'm just not smart enough to understand it. Well, it was actually Robert Bork who brought to my attention that the reason it never made sense to me is because it doesn't make sense. And Justice Thomas, his hope is that the court will go in that direction or revisit that. The prize for the most wacko reasoning for upholding Roe 20 years later in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, though, is notoriously as follows. I'm sure you've heard this one. Quote, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, of the mystery of human life. What's that have to do with the law? And tell that to a guy who's defining his own existence as Superman. He jumps out a window, a tall building. Where are these people coming from? They're running our country. The arguments against Roe, up until Dobbs, are best stated, in my view, by the dissent filed by Justice Byron White, joined by then Associate Justice Rehnquist. Quote, I find nothing in the language or history of the Constitution to support the court's judgment. As an exercise of raw judicial power, the court perhaps has the authority to do what it does today, but its judgment is an improvident and extravagant exercise of the power of judicial review. Justice White further observed that the court, quote, values the convenience of the pregnant mother more than the continued existence and development of the life that she carries, and that he saw, quote, no constitutional warrant for imposing such an order of priorities on the people and legislatures of the states. He correctly observed that Roe replaced a constitutional barrier to state efforts to protect human life by investing mothers and doctors with the constitutionally protected right to exterminate. He argued that the issue should be left, quote, with the people and to the political processes the people have devised to govern their affairs, quoted almost exactly in Dobbs by Justice Alito. And of course, Byron White was vindicated in Dobbs. One more case. Oh, we still have some time. Another family law case, and that presents similar jurisprudential issues concerning same-sex marriage. question here is, how do you pronounce it? Obergefell, I never know. Obergefell, what's the correct pronunciation? Obergefell, thank you. In legalizing, indeed constitutionalizing same-sex marriage, the court incorrectly stated that doing so would, quote, pose no harm of risk to third parties, and that the First Amendment would protect those who disagree with same-sex marriage. Well, the third parties they had in mind were obviously not bakers or florists or, wait for it, clergy. That may come. And then there are the name-calling issues of being labeled a bigot or a hater, of having a phobia about LGBT people. And I can say pretty clearly, and I should say that I can talk about this with some immunity, because I have hired openly gay people, I have promoted them, I've given them bonuses. You can give bonuses in the federal government, by the way. That's sort of another, most people think the bonus is the idea of job security. You won't lose your job unless you don't show up. You know the story. Anyhow, the name calling. A lot of people think that you're, I'm sorry. So, well, my point is, I'm not a bigot and I'm not a hater and I have no phobia. Snakes and rats maybe, but no human beings. On the other hand, I'm not going to define my own existence apart from Mother Nature and objective biological reality. The dissenters in Hodges again got it right. Justice Alito correctly said that those who disagree with same-sex marriage, quote, will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools, end quote. Well, it's not just a risk, and the tense is no longer future. The future is now. He went on to say, all Americans, whatever they're thinking on this issue, should worry about what the majority's claim of power portends. And over the last 40 years or so, and it's one that coincides with my adult lifetime, tolerance in this area has led to acceptance, which is where not long ago, even Bill and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama drew the line, and no one was calling them bigots or homophobes. But then that led to endorsement, and now to obedience. Decorate my wedding cake, Buster. That's how it is. Here again, before this bad decision, states were working things out for themselves. About a half a dozen on their own legitimized same-sex marriage, and about 3 times that number specifically rejected it via their statutes or constitutional amendments, or both. But 5 people out of more than 300 million thought they knew better. Is there something wrong with this picture? Is this so-called democratic republic in fact a judicial aristocracy? If Article 3 judges at the district and circuit levels are lords and ladies, does that make the Supreme Court justices princes and princesses, queens and kings? When aristocrats of any kind behave well, they set good examples for their subjects. When they make good decisions, their countrymen benefit. When they behave badly, they sow scandal. And when they decide badly, they can bring ruin. In conclusion, Alexander Hamilton famously wrote in the Federalist that the judiciary would be the least dangerous branch of government, controlling neither the purse nor the sword. Well, he got that one wrong big time. What have the founding fathers wrought? Or perhaps more accurately, John Marshall. And how would we fix it? Thank you. Questions, comments, rotten tomatoes?
So we're going to have Professor Dewar just comment for about 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up to any questions. And then we'll answer some others.
Good, nice.
Professor Dewar, are you there?
So, Judge Dewar.
Professor and Judge Dewar, are you there?
Oh.
Maybe not. Maybe I can chat with him. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, Professor Dewar, we are ready for you to give just a few thoughts before we open it up to question and answer.
Well, I'm very honored to be with you today. I appreciate one of my former students, Ashley Brown, inviting me. My name is Dale Durer. I am a state circuit court judge in Virginia. I sit in the county of Culpeper, and I also have served on the adjunct faculty at American University, Washington College of Law for the last 17 years. So it's good to be with you. I was asked to give some insight into the judicial decision-making process, and I found the presentation very enlightening because of the difference between the federal judiciary and the state judiciary. In Virginia, the legislature elects judges, and I am elected for an 8-year term. So in about 3.5 years, I'll have to go in front of the legislature if I want another 8-year term. And I am evaluated by the lawyers who appear in front of me, the jurors who sit in jury trials, as well as the court reporters, clerks, and bailiffs. And those judicial performance evaluations really go a long way to determining who gets reappointed or not. So I have an 8-year appointment, and I have to justify earning another 8 years when the term comes up. 60% of my docket is criminal, and about 40% of it is civil. And with respect to a lot of the decision-making processes I go through in criminal cases, those are largely driven by the model sentencing guidelines that we've had in Virginia for about 25 years. And most judges in Virginia, I'm no exception, are probably sentencing within those guidelines about 80% of the time. And I sentence below them about 10% of the time, and I go above them about 10% of the time. So a lot of the criminal cases are really dictated by sentencing guidelines. Just like the federal system, I would say probably about 95% of criminal cases are resolved by way of a plea agreement. And the other 40% of my docket is civil, and I get to deal with a lot of stuff such as domestic relations, equitable distribution of property and divorce, child custody cases, child visitation cases, and other types of things like personal injury cases, breach of contract, other torts. So it's really a mixture of things. And in terms of how I try and make decisions, where it's my job to make a decision, I tend to follow the precedent of the Virginia Supreme Court, the Virginia Court of Appeals as best I can. I'm not trying to rewrite their opinions for them, nor am I trying to rewrite the laws of the legislature. So a lot of what a trial judge does is very precedent driven. Those guys on the appellate court get to play around with changing stuff, and God bless them, but I'm pretty much wired into making sure I follow the precedent that governs me. Doesn't matter what I think about it. It just matters that I follow it. So that's kind of my job and my judicial making philosophy in a nutshell. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'll turn things back over to Matt. If anybody has any questions, I'll do my very best to attempt to answer them.
Thank you, Professor Durer. We're so grateful that you were able to join us today. Thank you. And we'd like to invite Mr. Augustine back up to the stand, and any questions that you have for either Judge Durer or for Mr. Augustine, please just raise your hand and I will bring this microphone around.
I have a question for Judge Durer.
Judge, is that Elvis in the background there?
It is Elvis.
You want to tell us a little about that?
I can. I'm a huge Elvis fan, and this year I had to write a check to the IRS and the Virginia Department of Taxation because I misjudged some analytical stuff. And on April Fool's Day, when I gave my accountant the check to send to them, he snuck this over, knowing that I was a huge Elvis fan. So that is a statue, a life-size cutout of Elvis Presley from about 1962.
Well, I was in Memphis a couple years ago, and they had, the tailor is still there that made Elvis's pre-Las Vegas clothes. So if you want a jacket, an Elvis jacket, he'll make one for you.
Lansky Brothers are still on Beale Street, I'm told.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions? Any questions from the audience? None? Comments?
would you,
I don't think I need this. Can you hear me?
I can, because I'm the judge.
Oh,
Judge.
okay, sorry.
so would you similarly, be opposed to, for the same kind of principled reasons about the, the proper extent of the Supreme Court's power, would you similarly be opposed to, like if the court tried to say fetal lifehood, is a thing and make that the law of the land despite states not having that as their laws, as well as it not being, as far as I understand, ever in our history and tradition?
Is that to me or to judge?
That's to you.
Okay. No, I think Dobbs got it right. I think Lindsey Graham is not where he should be. And I think, Judge, I said I thought Dobbs got it right. And simply for federalism reasons. I mean, you could argue a lot of lives would be saved if you federalize it in the right direction. But of course, that may not happen. And there's something wrong with just nationalizing everything, you know? I mean, this is a huge country. It's a very diverse country. And you know, the founders had it right. I mean, it isn't just separation of powers. It's a federal system too. That the states, if they're just going to be absorbed, I just find that very, very disturbing. It's not a matter of law so much as it is a political philosophy. And, you know, smaller is better. And you, anyhow, no, I don't think the court is going to do anything like that.
I don't either.
And they got burned once since they had sent that road case back to Texas. Again, I just think the whole atmosphere would be different. The issue wouldn't go away, but it would be fought out on smaller territory. Judge, you have any comment?
Oh, no, one of the things that trial judges like to do is decide a case in the most narrow way possible. So I try and just decide the controversy that's in front of me. And I try and keep any editorial comments about other things out of the equation, because I don't want to, well, one, create more work for myself, but two, as an umpire, you just want to decide what's in front of you. You don't want to predict what may be coming down the pipe.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. No, we are so grateful again to Mr. Augustin and Judge Durer for coming today, and thank you all for coming. I know that, you know, obviously we have Chick-fil-A, but we also have some amazing speakers who come. So thank you again. We invite you for next week, next Thursday. We're going to have an event with Louis Capozzi. He is just barely finishing his term as a clerk with Justice Gorsuch. So you're all invited to come at noon next week. Thank you, and thank you again for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great though, because I feel like it's such a,
Thank you, Judge
it's
Durer.
reassuring to hear that that's how you feel, because you know, it's such a common criticism of the kind of arguments that you just made, to be like, oh, well, you know, that's just a shield for actually just wanting to, you know, take away the right from women all over the country, you know, and so now that you've succeeded in overturning Roe, now you're all just going to remove the fetal personhood as a nationwide thing. So I think it's really great to hear that, you know, you're principled and like. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying.
If you understood what took place in the morning, number one,